So here's the thing. I've been probably called into organizations about a dozen times now in just last year. And most of the conversation goes like, our Azure bill went up. We don't know why. Can you help us? And what I find when I dig in is not something mysterious. It's just that nobody really know what they're spending money on. And they are not actually looking at what they're spending money on either. And I get it. You're busy putting out the fire, working on some projects. But here's what happened. You spin a VM for test, you forgot about it, it stayed there for 6 months, and now you have 2 grand on the Azure bill, especially for something which hasn't been used at all. Or even better, you have a storage account where people have been dumping data into without really getting to go and clean that up. So today I want to walk you through some basic Azure cost audit. This is the 10-point checklist I actually use when I'm brought into an environment which I have to figure out on what's going on. And I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it yourself. Hi, I'm Praveen Singh, a cloud solution consultant and Microsoft certified trainer. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and click the subscribe button right now. We talk about cloud architect, best practices, and honestly, just how not to waste money in Azure. So here's what we are covering today. First, I'm going to show you the tools you need to do the audit, where to look, and what reports to pull. Then we are going to walk through 10 specific scenarios and things I check for. And finally, I'll explain what to do with the information once you have collected all the data. Because collecting data without actioning on it is simply pointless. Now this is aimed to anyone who is responsible for managing their cloud cost. Whether you're a cloud admin, a solution architect, or somebody who simply just got handed an Azure subscription and told to figure it out. This is a super practical stuff today. Alright, so let's jump in. So let me set the stage here. Most organizations when they start in Azure don't really have any cost management strategy. They just start deploying, and that's fine for 1 month or 2 months until your team starts to grow. Your bill will eventually go from 500 to 2000, and nobody really know why it jumped. And the problem is Azure billing is not exactly intuitive. You've got reserve instances, you got pay as you go, enterprise agreement, CSP subscriptions, then you've got spot instances, storage transaction cost, and all the costs that looks like in cents but really add up to hundreds of dollars when you're doing millions of them. It's a bunch of stuff layered on top of each other. So what I'm thinking here at this point is even before we start looking at cutting the cost, we need to understand what we are actually spending the money on. That's the audit, and I'll be honest, when I first started these audits, I thought it would be complicated. But in the end, it's just really checking the same 10 things over and over again. Once you know what you're looking for, it may take you 1 to 2 hours to get the complete picture. The other thing that I've learned while working with my clients and seeing all the organizations out there is most of the waste is not malicious. It's mainly just stuff that they have forgotten to delete. Somebody just spun up something for a project and now the project is not there anymore. The resources are still there. Somebody deployed a new dev environment and nobody cared to go back and clean it up. Somebody enabled a feature which they didn't really need, and that's where all the money goes. Alright, let me jump over to the portal and show you exactly what tools you need. So if I go into Azure Portal here, the first place you want to go is cost management and billing. This is going to be your home base for everything we are doing today. Now to access this properly, you at least need reader access on the subscription you are going to evaluate. If you don't have this permission, go ask whoever owns the subscription, because without it, you're basically flying blind. So once you're in there, our first main tool is cost analysis. This is where you actually see your spending broken down by resource group, services, or regions. And the beautiful thing is, this tool is absolutely free. You're not paying extra to see where your money is going. The other tool I always open is Azure Advisor. Now, Azure Advisor is Microsoft's recommendation engine. It's going to tell you all about what resources you need to downsize, upsize, or remove any resources such as orphaned disk or orphaned public IPs. We'll come back to this later on. Alright, so you got the idea. These are 2 main tools. Cost analysis for actual spending of resources and Advisor for the recommendation. Let's start checking things now. Alright, so here's my 10-point checklist, and I want to be clear. This is not some comprehensive list. This is just basic stuff that catches probably 80% of the waste out there. So let's walk through it. Point number 1 is idle and underutilized VMs. And this is the big one. So what I do is go into cost analysis and I filter by resource type to just show me the virtual machines. And then I look at what I'm spending. If I'm spending $3,000 a month just on VMs alone, I want to know which VM is eating that budget. Now here's where the advisor comes in. If I jump over to advisor and go to cost tab, it's going to show me the recommendation for underutilized VMs. These are machines that are running but barely used. Like, hey, the standard D4S V3 is running at 5% CPU and you could downsize to different SKU and save this much money. And look, I get it. You might need this VM to stay that size for some reason, but at least now you know it's there. And that's the point of the audit. The number 2 is orphan disk and snapshots. So coming back to storage side of things, orphan disks are really common in Azure environments. This happens when you delete a VM and don't really check the box saying delete all associated resources. So now you have got 512 GB of premium SSD, public IP, and everything else that goes with it. And all of that stuff attached to nothing. So what do I do is go into disks in Azure Portal and sort by disk state. If I see a bunch of disks that says unattached, those are candidate for deletion. Now before you go and delete them, make sure nobody else is using them for any other purposes. Check with your team, but 9 times out of 10, they are just the leftovers. Same thing with the snapshots. If I go into snapshots, I'll probably find some snapshot from 2 years ago. And those snapshots are definitely costing you money. Point number 3 is old and unused storage accounts. And storage accounts are tricky because they don't really cost as much individually, but the data in them can add up over time. So what do I do is go into storage account and just start clicking through them. I'm looking at the data usage and how much data is actually stored in them. And this one pro tip, and look at the last modified date on each blob. If you've got a storage account with 500 gigs of data and the last modified date was like 3 years ago, that's probably an old backup or some log files. You can move that to cold or archive tier or simply delete them if it's actually just garbage. Point number 4 is non-production environment running 24/7. This one kills me. So many organizations have dev test environment that runs 24/7 with nobody supervising them. And I get why. You want the systems to be available when you need them. But if the dev team works 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, why would you run those VMs on weekends or after 5 o'clock? So what I recommend is tag these resources properly so that you can identify if it's a dev or production resource. Then use some simple automation using Azure Automation and PowerShell to shut down these VMs after hours and turn them on when you need it. We've got a video on that if you want to dive deeper. Point number 5 is over provisioned databases. If I jump over to SQL or Cosmos DB, I'm looking at the pricing tier here. And what I often see is somebody deployed a Cosmos DB or SQL for a proof of concept. So they picked the highest tier because they just want to get through the stuff as quickly as possible with the highest performance. Or maybe simply they just didn't know what they were doing. And at the end of the project, they just left it hanging there. So check your databases. If you're running a SQL database with business critical application, but you're only doing 10 queries a minute, you probably don't need them. You can scale down to general purpose or standard tier. Point number 6 is public IP, which you're not using. Okay, this is a small one. The public IPs don't really cost as much alone, but they still cost you whether you are using them or not. So if you go into Azure Portal, find public IP addresses and look at all the list of IP addresses and see which ones are unassociated. Those were the public IPs which were created but not assigned to anything at all. Or maybe they were just left over from the VM that was removed. And here's the thing, maybe they are only $1 or $2 a month, but if you got like 60 or 70 of them, you can do the math on how much that comes out to be. Point number 7 is load balancer and application gateway without backends. So same concepts here. If you have a load balancer or application gateway provision but there's no backend in it, you are most essentially overpaying for the resource which you don't need. So check your networking resources and make sure you have provisioned based on what your capacity is. Point number 8 is storage redundancy. And this one is about understanding your data requirement. A lot of time I see storage accounts with GRS or RAGRS when the data itself is just a dev test environment data, which literally does not need that level of protection. So if I click into the storage account and look at the replication settings, what I'm asking myself is, does this data need to be replicated to a different region? Or is LRS simply fine for this? Because GRS costs more, and if it's just a test data, you don't really need those replications in place. And number 9 is monitoring and logs that you are not actually using. And this is a big one that people forget about. So if you go into Azure Log Analytics and Application Insights, I'm looking at data ingestions. Because you pay for these services based on how much data you ingest. And what I find mostly is people turn on verbose logging for troubleshooting and they never turn it back off. And now you are ingesting gigabytes of logs that nobody is even looking at. So check your diagnostic settings and make sure you're only logging what you actually need. And finally, number 10 is no budget or alert settings. Okay, this one is not about finding waste. It's actually about preventing it. If you don't have a budget in your cost management, you need to do it today, right now. And it's super simple. So if I go into budgets here, I can create a budget for subscription for specific resource groups. I set a monthly limit, let's say 500 or 5000, and then I set alerts at like 80% or 100% of that budget. So now if my spending starts to creep up, and I'm not surprised at the end of the month looking at the Azure bill. And honestly, this is the thing that prevents most of the issues. Because if you know that your spending is going up while it's happening, you can easily go back and investigate. You can shut things down and you can easily remove something that you don't need. But if you don't have any alerts, you don't know that until the bill comes out. Alright, so now we got the audit done and you've got the list of all the items. What do we do now? So what I recommend at this point is you categorize your items and findings into three different buckets. The first one is quick wins. These are things you can fix immediately, such as removing orphaned disk or public IPs. So do them today. The second bucket is optimization project. These are things that need little bit of planning, like shutting down dev environments at night, resizing database, moving data to cheaper storage tier, or putting automation in place. These might take a few days or a week to implement properly. The third bucket is architecture review. These are bigger changes which might need you to sit through and think why this stuff is deployed the way it is. Like maybe you got bunch of VMs sitting individually instead of them being in a virtual machine scale set. Or maybe you should be using reserve instances for long running workloads. These are long term projects. And here's something I have learned. Don't try to fix everything at once. Pick the quick win first, get that done, and then move to the next step. Because if you try to do everything at once, you will probably get overwhelmed and nothing will get done eventually. The one last thing is document everything you find, perhaps in a spreadsheet or somewhere in the wikis. Because 6 months from now, you probably want to run this audit again and you will want to compare what findings you had 6 months ago and what you found after 6 months. So there you have it. Basic Azure cost audit in 10 points. I hope you found this useful. It's all about intentionally looking at your Azure spending, the architecture of the resources, and making sure you're only paying for stuff you actually need. If you want to dive deeper into any of the topics such as cost management alerts or setting up automation for dev test environments, I've got videos on those topics too. If you have any questions or found something that I haven't covered in this video, drop a comment. I would love to hear what you're dealing with. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay curious and keep building.